If you don't want spoilers, watch my story explained for Silent Hill F first or finish the game before watching this. I will be operating under the assumption that you've beat the game already. In this video, I will be going over some of the themes and ideas behind the game. I would like to also go over some theories, like how Hinako was actually pregnant, and then answer some questions like why did Hinako's father cry at the end, or why did this doctor have eyes in his box? A lot of people in my comments from my Story Explained video gave their theories, and I wanted to share that. Shout out to those who helped generate discussions. Then after, I want to analyze each of the monsters and what I think they represent. These are just personal takes, nothing official. Feel free to add your own insights as this is an open discussion. I don't know if I'm going to do all the monsters, but I at least have 16 or so that I want to talk about. With that being said, if you want to visit Silent Hill in real life, hit the like button. Or you can stay here, where I will welcome you to
Silent Hill F.
Silent Hill has always made its monsters out of inner pain, and the very town shapes itself to the fears, guilts, and shames hiding in people's minds. Silent Hill F carries that same structure into a different cultural frame. This time the developers chose 1960s Japan as the stage, and they deliberately shifted the monsters' designs and visuals to reflect Japanese horror aesthetics. I have only ever played the Silent Hill 2 remake when I did my videos on that game, and the horror over there on that side of the planet was industrial, had a lot of rusting metal and decaying buildings, nurses, flesh monsters, and the iconic Pyramid Head. However, F layers on that supernatural horror through a more familiarly unfamiliar environment, more nature, more trees, and invasive flora choking out the world the same way that Emma chokes me. And I say familiarly unfamiliar because the horror here is now filtered through Japanese culture and folklore, which immediately changes how everything feels. The classic Silent Hill games built their horror through spaces like hospitals, apartments, and prisons, cold, Western structures where repression hides inside of the walls. But here, the fear grows out of shrines, fields, narrow wooden homes, and entire streets overtaken by living plants. The setting itself feels alive, and it carries centuries of myth and superstition with it. Even the time frame adds that sense of distance. 1960s Japan, not that far back, but it is just enough to feel different. It's a period that's recognizable enough that when in-game I see a calendar and know it's a calendar, or an old clock, or an old rotary phone. I know what those things are, but I'm not familiar enough with them because I have a smartphone today. I lied, I'm old. I had all of those things growing up in my house, but that's because of my grandparents. Yet those objects, frozen in time, carry a weight of history that I can't quite grasp. I know many might be turned off by the variation in what is known to be Silent Hill, and I understand where those views are coming from. Personally, I enjoyed Silent Hill F, but I also note that it didn't exactly feel like a Silent Hill game. It felt like something else. Maybe it's because I haven't really played the other Silent Hill games, bar the Silent Hill 2 remake, but ultimately F is not a bad game in my opinion. I don't think the devs need to rehash what they've already done. They don't have to stick with it. They can do other things. I think that if this was titled differently and wasn't part of the Silent Hill franchise, I believe I might have liked it even more than I already did. It does have some of the Silent Hill vibes and psychological themes that I'm familiar with in Silent Hill, but it still didn't feel like it was a Silent Hill game when I was playing it. And that's not too much of an issue. I'm just saying if it was titled differently, I might have expected something else. It's like opening a can of Coke, but inside it's Pepsi. I have nothing against Pepsi, but I was expecting Coke. I don't drink soda either way. Whiskey is better. Another example, I remember the band Arctic Monkeys came out with their album AM, and I really dug that. But a lot of the stuff they came out with after, not so much. But I understood their decision. I just had AM nostalgia. Same thing here. Even when talking about how the devs chose to set Silent Hill F in this exact time and place, they didn't pick 1960s Japan at random. In their interviews, they specifically mentioned that this was a period where women were under enormous pressure to conform. Society placed value on a woman only when she was a dutiful daughter, a proper wife or a self-sacrificing mother. A woman's identity was never fully her own. It was absorbed into her role for somebody else, typically a man. Now, even though they didn't officially state that F stands or means feminism or female, some people heard the devs say,
Hinako in this game has to fight female oppression.
And well, I saw a lot of individuals just right out the gate hating on the game. I don't know much about a lot. And when it comes to politics, movements, ideologies, stuff like that, I don't engage with most of it. I'm a YouTuber who talks about games. I stay in my lane, especially when I don't know anything about either side. I just know what I know, and I like my bubble. But don't get me wrong, I understand no one wants to be preached to. I'm the same way. I don't want a Jehovah's Witness bothering me while I'm trying to go 2-12 as Spider-Man and Marvel Rivals. And the absolute last place I want to see someone's ideals pushed onto me is in my video games. But I also don't think that this game was ever preachy and pushy at any point. Sure, it's prevalent, but like Silent Hill 2 had a lot of the same prominent aspects about women being sexualized, oppressed, and abused, so what's the issue here?
It's always the same with you. You're only after one thing.
Angela, please.
You don't have to lie. Go ahead. Say it. Or you could just force me. Like he always did.
Other Silent Hill games probably had those aspects too. It's like, if you want to look into it, if you want to read the notes and descriptions and all that, it's gonna be there. But I don't think that it had an overbearing narrative that was pushed. What makes this so powerful is the timing. Because in the West, the 1960s were the respark years of the women's rights movement, with Activision pushing for workplace equality, not Activision, activism. Activision is not gonna give a shit. Activism pushing for workplace equality, reproductive rights, and independence. Japan was also experiencing social change, but in a much slower, more conservative way, especially when it came to smaller towns. That cultural lag created a stark contrast. Modernity was creeping in, but the old expectations still chained women down. The devs intentionally grounded the game in that tension, the culture of silence and suppression. And unfortunately, domestic violence was a thing. For women, marriage was about duty to her husband and her family. Choice, am I saying that right? Choice wasn't a thing for her. A woman's education and work opportunities came second to the belief that a woman's fulfillment was only found in serving her husband and raising children. When you put that lens over Silent Hill's classic formula of guilt, repression, and trauma, the horror takes on an entirely different texture. You can see it in Hinako herself. She is a young woman caught in the exact same environment. Every monster that hunts her down, every note that she reads, every ritual she's forced into, all of it reflects a society where women were stripped of individuality and remade to fit a mold. The devs built that into the DNA of this game. Just like older Silent Hill titles visualized guilt and abuse through monsters like Pyramid Head or nurses, F lets that cultural oppression seep into the design of its creatures. They are literally shaped by what women were forced to endure in that era. They are beyond psychological manifestations of one person's guilt because now they're deeply rooted in folklore, in nature, in the clash between tradition and modernity. For example, the Kashimashi appear as grotesque dolls stitched together from scraps of flesh, their forms twisted into distorted versions of women. Are they dolls or are they mannequins? They shuffle in groups, their numbers creating a sense of pressure and suffocation. Their design shows that they were not shaped by choice, that they were constructed in the painful image of what men demanded from them. The name itself, Kashimashi, is a Japanese word used to dismiss women as noisy or bothersome. In F, Kashimashi turned that insult into a presence that hones in on Hinako. They are constantly hunting her down, but what makes this even more settling is the way they move, because their bodies contort and bend in sharp, unnatural angles, jerking in fits that feel broken and just completely wrong. I just hate looking at it. It just looks weird. Every step is twisted into something inhuman, as if their joints were never their own, and that's because never was. The stitching across their skin reinforces this impression. They're stitched together in an imitation of what men wanted, built piece by piece into lifeless dolls. Even their faces, or rather lack thereof, reflect this. They don't have faces. They don't have an identity because they got married, meaning now they're just an extension of their husbands. Nothing more. Their features are scarred and sewn into place, with their mouths warped into grotesque smiles, and they're not smiling because they're happy. They are wearing masks of obedience carved into their flesh as if to erase the possibility of any real expression. The result is a look that strips away their humanity and leaves behind a hollow impression of what women were expected to be. Forced to smile. Their attacks on Hinako come from this broken identity. They try to drag her into the same existence, punishing her for resisting the mold that destroyed them, brutally insisting that she bends the knee to the standards. And this reflects the reality of women's lives in 1960s Japan, where their value was often defined through obedience and conformity. The Kashimashi embody that demand in flesh. Their faces and bodies show the violence that they received of being reshaped into somebody that they never chose to be. They are body horror as social commentary, the first living reminder that Hinako is being forced into a struggle against both monsters and the expectations that created them. But then there's the Ara-Abare, which takes the shape of a swollen, pulsating beast, its body erupting with lumps of flesh, organs, and flowering growths. Its very name, Ara-Abare, translates to wild violence or reckless rampage, and that meaning is captured perfectly in its movements. Take a look at how it simply swings its enormous blade in every direction, consumed by rage that has no outlet. The journal entry that Hinako writes in describes it as a repulsive lump of flesh filled to the brim with maniacal anger, comparing its outbursts to something even more dangerous than a wild animal. And so when you look at the Kashimashi and you're reminded that women were silenced and reshaped by conformity, the Ara-Abare represent the men who enforced those standards through tyrannical imposition and violence. This is the body of exaggerated, unchecked male rage, an absolute uncontrolled storm of destruction. And the flowers blooming out of its wounds tie it back to the parasitic curse that is running through Silent Hill F, showing how this violence spreads, infects, and thrives rather than ever being contained. In the social reality of 1960s Japan, women were faced both with systemic silencing and the threat of direct violence if they stepped out of their assigned roles. If they displeased their husbands in any way, no matter how small, wives might just suffer physical ramifications. The Ara-Abare reflects that threat in its purest form. You see, it doesn't have any eyes, it doesn't have ears, just a giant bellowing mouth and a vicious hand, or is it an arm? It's like an arm blade arm, ready to strike. Lack of control and violence for its own sake. Lashing out blindly because that violence has always been allowed to exist. Its design makes it clear that the rage of men, that the wrath of men, is not separate from the horrors around Hinako. In fact, it's one of the core sources feeding them. But the Ayakakashi show a different side of horror. Dressed in tattered school uniforms and bound with rope, they stand silently in the rice fields, their pale faces frozen like masks, and they wait until Hinako approaches before lashing out suddenly in contorted, sudden movements, turning the quiet into a trap. But the name Ayakakashi comes from Japanese folklore. In older traditions, the word Ayakashi refers to strange yokai, supernatural beings or apparitions that appear at boundaries, often tied to rivers or sea. The second part of their name, though, Kakashi, means scarecrow. If you've watched a little anime called Naruto, you might recognize it from the character Kakashi, whose name draws from the same word. Together, the Ayakakashi are scarecrow-like yokai standing lifeless in the fields until they spring forward with violence. For Hinako, their presence feels personal. She was bullied and ostracized by the other children in her town, treated as if she didn't belong, and the Ayakakashi symbolize that cruelty. They wait for her to falter, and then try to attack her off guard, echoing the hostility and rejection that she endured growing up. Their assaults remind her that even among her peers, she was never safe from being singled out and hurt. However, there's something rather sickening about the way that these monsters are portrayed. We know the monsters in Silent Hill have deeper meanings, and the devs don't just make random choices in designs or behaviors. From the way that they walk, attack, or even bend, it hints at an underlying message. So when I saw the Ayakakashi do this, I thought to myself, that's weird. Those are supposed to be children. Why are they being shown bent like this in short skirts? Now, some might think it's just the doll, but it's not, because of what it represents. I think by having their bodies contort in this way, the devs are trying to send a message, shed light on, can I even say this on YouTube? On the inappropriate ways that some may have looked at them. Unfortunately, we live in a world where demented and disgusting humans exist. Revolting. However, I think that's what the meaning is behind them being bent like this. But then there's the Blade Legs monster, or the Harai Katashiro. Also, this monster, the Ayakakashi, and the Kashimashi all feel the same to me. They move the same and sort of behave the same as well, I think. They're more like variants of the same thing. However, the Harai Katashiro is one of the more disturbing figures that Hinako faces. Harai Katashiro meaning something like purification effigy or substitute doll for exorcism. But the irony here is that instead of cleansing corruption, the Harai Katashiro become corrupted. A ritual that was meant to remove suffering now becomes it, hunting Hinako down with blades and a mask. Where their legs should be are the blades. And I had a bit of trouble trying to decipher what it could have represented, but then I thought to myself, oh, what about foot binding? So I don't know if you guys know about foot binding, but it's where girls would have their feet tightly bound from a young age to keep them small, since lotus feet, that's what they were called, were seen as a mark of beauty, obedience, and marriageability. It was extremely painful, and it would permanently disfigure the feet. But that was in China. This is Japan. So I can't make that connection, although it was interesting because it was almost like bladed feet. But again, two different countries, two different nationalities, two different peoples. So instead of trying to see how bladed feet fit into the times, I just focused on what I thought blades for feet actually symbolized. All I could think about was something that kind of ties back to the main themes of F, in that blades represent how women were often reshaped to serve roles that harmed them. Instead of standing on their own feet, they were forced to stand on instruments of pain, expected to serve, endure, and cut themselves down in the process. The Harai Katashiro portray a reality where progress and survival are tied to self-destruction, where every step forward risks deeper wounds, and all for their husbands to say, good girl. If they even did say good girl. Hinako even cut off her own arm, had her skin singed off, and her face cut out similarly. Speaking of cut faces, covering Harai Katashiro's face is the Okame mask, a traditional symbol of joy, fertility, and the image of a quote-unquote good wife. Pretty huge learning that, huh? Like buttons right there. In Japanese culture, the mask is tied to ideals of cheerfulness and domesticity, presenting a woman as somebody who should smile through hardship. Again, if you're a lady, you've probably heard a guy say, you should smile more. On the Harai Katashiro, this mask is turned demonic, almost. The forced smile is on a mask of compliance. Together, the blades and the mask capture the dual burdens placed on women like Hinako. The physical burden of being forced into roles that cut away freedom, and the emotional burden of being expected to endure it silently with a smile. For Hinako, she's attacked by these monsters, and their presence feels very intimate, because she's getting attacked by these Harai Katashiro, and she sees the horrors of society in these blade legs. For her to look at them, to see that problem in them, and see what the world wants her to become, which is that. I mean, bro, if I was a girl, you'd have me ducked all the way up. Hell nah. I'd be like, fuck that, I'm gonna do my own thing. But they are living reminders of how even the most natural act, walking, becomes dangerous when the world insists on twisting your body into something it was never meant to be, a weaponized image of what society demanded women should be. I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I'm not going in any particular order. I'm kind of just going down the list of monsters that I have here. But the next one is the Shackled monster that we first meet in the other world. Shackled at the wrists, ankles, and neck, its whole body is bound in chains and torn flesh, as if punishment itself has shaped it. But the most disturbing detail is its face. Straight up doesn't have one. Where its eyes and mouth should be, there is only hollow. And, dude, I don't know about you, but, you know? It's scary as shit, bro. Like, imagine you see this mother lover in real life or even in thine dreams. No, it's a no for me, dog. As a human, when I can't see a face on something, I think it's terrifying. Deeply, disturbing and unsettling. And I want out. Obviously, for reasons I can't officially get into, Shackled Daddy hunts by sound rather than sight, forcing Hinako to move carefully or risk being murked by it. But the absence of a face says everything. In Japanese culture, the face is tied to identity, to expression, to how you are seen by others and how you see others. As a former child, I would look at people's faces and try to gauge if they were friend or foe, and to take that away is to erase humanity entirely. That's why for me this was an upsetting monster to see, but not the only one. Also, let me know which monster in Silent Hill F do you think is the scariest or the most disturbing one. But bringing it back to focusing in on what the Shackled monster signifies and how it interacts with Hinako, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, I thought that the facelessness of this monster reflects the way that men as well would have to erase their own humanity in order to maintain control. They lose their identities too. They become these hollow figures, and they have to be dominant because that's what society is telling them to be. It's not that Hinako isn't meant to be seen. It's more like this monster doesn't see her at all because he himself has been chained to his role. Shackled to the role that society says that men should be. Yes, I don't think that we should ignore the fact that men suffer too. I can guarantee that not all men, especially during this time, or any time, not all of them are monsters. Some are victims of their times too. And I can hear you guys saying, getting ready to type, sure, not all men, but always a man. Look, I get you. I understand. The Shackled monster enforces silence by becoming it. A faceless man who becomes violence himself. And again, I could be wrong. These are just personal interpretations. The other thing that I thought about while reading this script was that the Shackled monster can hear Hinako's footsteps and only chases after her and attacks her when she makes a sound. So maybe it's something like, oh, women are supposed to be quiet, so that's why the Shackled monster attacks when she's making noise. I don't know. But I do think it's also worth noting, while we're on this topic, something about Hinako's dad here. I'll go more into depth later, but at the end of the game, when Hinako returns home to see her dad, he hangs his head low and he starts crying. Now let me preface this by saying, I'm not sympathizing with him. He's a shitbag. But I think he's showing some, inner problems here. He's at odds with himself. That's why homie starts crying. Harkening back to the Shackled roles, the Shackled monster. Also, side note, some of you guys might think, oh, why don't people just do their own thing? Why conform to societal standards that deeply? I don't want to spend too much time explaining this, but just know that there's a huge difference in cultures between Asians and Westerners. In the USA, everybody is mostly me, but in Asian cultures, they're more about we. But Eskie is more about we. Which one's better, which one's worse, both have their pros and cons, not going to get too deep into a discussion there. The point is, for the most part, in Japan, especially in a small town, you can't just do your own thing because society doesn't operate the same way. I also noticed the lock on the Shackled monster's throat. Seeing that deepens this impression that I have about forced men to play their roles, still being monsters, even if deep down, they don't want to be. However, for Hinako, whoever the guy might have been or wanted to be, doesn't matter, because in her eyes, understandably, it simply becomes a reflection of the quiet brutality that shaped her world. The men didn't need words to remind women of their place, so it doesn't matter to her if the guy is a tortured soul, because the result is still the same, and women are the ones receiving it. But the next monster of the Japanese Silent Hill is the Oi-Omoi, made up of fused doll-like bodies crying out in piercing chorus that grinds into Hinako's mind. Oi means to bear or carry, while omoi refers to deep thoughts, feelings, or emotions. Together, it translates to burdened thoughts or the weight of emotions. And just take a look at this monster. Every twisted limb and every crying, and boy do they cry, face feels like a burden stacked on top of one another, forming a living monument to pressure and despair. The inspiration comes partly from celluloid dolls, which were cheap, mass-produced toys made of flammable plastics that became popular in Japan during the early 20th century. They were often fragile and burned easily, which gave them a reputation for danger despite their innocent appearance. In real life, they carried an undercurrent of disposability, like objects meant to be treasured briefly and then cast aside. In F, that disposability and that fragility takes on horrific weight. The Oi-Omoi is a mass of dolls, fused into something overwhelmingly oppressive. Its cries feel endless, annoying AF, and its body becomes a suffocating wall of anguish. For Hinako, I would assume that she's seeing this monster because it represents the unbearable weight of expectations and emotions that are forced onto her. The feeling of being buried alive under collective grief, shame, and the suffocating demands of a society which start from childhood, hence the dolls. Similarly in design, there is the vomiting monster. Its body is a mangled and unsightly pile of faces, stacked and mashed together. It spits out this red bile which creates this bloom of flowers and tendrils trying to reach for Hinako. If she gets too close, she's ensnared for a bit and suffers damage over time. The journal entry describes how these faces are unfamiliar yet act as if they know Hinako, spitting out repulsive things that poison every space they enter. Now, at first look, I thought it was a father who might hold on to his family, dominate and control everything. I figured the other faces were members of his family stuck and unable to break free of him, meaning all they can do now is just be a part of it whenever he spews vile words everywhere. By the way, I have to take a moment and say that not all fathers are bad. Even when exploring Silent Hill F's themes, I think it's very important to remind everyone that there are definitely good men and great fathers out there. However, I realize that after saying that I might be reducing, detracting, or diminishing the value of the messages one could receive from this game. But now I'm overthinking it. Or was I? Oh, yeah. The design of the vomiting monster. Looking at the notes again, she says that she doesn't recognize their faces, and so it actually starts to feel like a direct metaphor for public shaming. Women in Hinako's era were constantly policed by gossip, ridicule, and the scrutiny of others. I mean, look at one of Hinako's friends, Sakuko's parents. Her mom basically told her to stop being different for fear of being cast aside by the others in her town. At some point, they would even take her to the doctor, and he would tell her parents that she isn't really different, she's just got a bit of autism, but that there's nothing wrong with that they just need to be patient, supportive, and love their baby girl. Side note to the side note here again, in many Asian and Latino Hispanic households, the culture mostly ignores mental disorders. So, a lot of families will actively dismiss or ignore any signs of mental issues. They see it as a weakness or an embarrassment, and as a result, their kids end up never receiving the support they need. Depression, ADHD, ASD, BHG, never heard of them. Especially back in the 60s in Japan, bump that lack of recognition and acceptance even higher. If you're one of those who never got help or got it too late, blame your parents. I'm kidding, it's a joke. Kinda. The point is, if you feel two ways about it, don't blame yourself. But that's neither here nor there. You don't need a random guy on the internet telling you how to live your life or what to think. The vomit monster. This creature captures that societal pressure in physical form, corroding Hinako's good vibes as she strolls through Silent Hill by drowning her in hostility. What makes it even worse is how recognizable the experience is, because even if Hinako doesn't know these faces, the words that they spit feel personal, cutting straight into her, well, not cutting, I'd say like burning straight into her isolation, dealing psychological damage, a phrase that's actually used in-game to represent her health bar. It's the monsterization of shame and rumor, of being treated as a subject of ridicule with absolutely no way of defending yourself, except by not getting close to the venom. Then there is the glowing monster, one of the most directly revolting creatures Hinako faces. The journal describes its greedy eyes, its greasy hands, and its disturbing habit of acting familiar and chummy as it crawls toward her. Unlike the other monsters that stalk or ambush, this one is blatantly invasive. It lunges, pins her down, and even licks her, an act that turns the fight into a scene of pure violation. The design leaves little ambiguity. The monster represents the men who leer, grope, and invade women's spaces, ignoring their wishes. These women can't fight back for multiple reasons. Some are likely shocked and stunned by how sickening the situation is, some physically are overpowered and can't fight back, or others might be too scared to even try, out of sheer terror of being harmed. I know it's a tough subject to talk about, but one, I bring it up to shed light on the fact that this still happens today, so if you see this out there, intervene. Silent Hill has always confronted players with mature, unsettling themes that dig into some of the darkest parts of the human condition. So you have to expect these types of talks when watching a Silent Hill video. But in my opinion, it's always better to talk and raise awareness about these things rather than to pretend that they don't exist. But let's stop getting distracted. Its movements are extremely aggressive but sloppy, rushing forward in bursts of violence and then wearing itself out, to pump-chump type thing, mirroring the ugly desperation of men who treat harassment as instinct. Its presence in the game forces the player into the same suffocating confrontation that Hinako and women in general endure. But what makes it even more painful is Hinako's reaction in her journal, because she dismisses it with a single word: typical. And that word kinda hits different. It shows that even as a child, Hinako already expects this behavior from men, so she's not fazed at all. It's just another Tuesday for her. And that normalization of harassment, the way that girls grow up bracing for it, says so much about the society that she lives in, just as much as it does about the creature itself. The glowing monster becomes the physical embodiment of predation, turning everyday experiences of being stared at, grabbed, or cornered into an unavoidable horror. Hinako's suffering. It reflects the collective reality of women condemned to a world where this is the norm. And that's horrible. But let's take it over to the drum monster. A gargantuan figure with a large taiko drum inside of its mouth. Taiko are traditional Japanese drums used in festivals and rituals, their sound carrying strength and unity. And I think the first time I ever saw one in real life was back in Disney World when my wife and I were on our honeymoon. I love my wife. Here, that cultural image is mutilated and the drum is turned into an instrument of domination rather than celebration. However, I am sure, just like the hills, you have eyes and you can see it's similar to the Ara-Abare not only in form, but in function, in how it silences others by overwhelming them with noise. Its pounding is constant, and its booms drown out anything else that might try to speak or be heard. It represents men who demand attention and authority, filling every space with their presence and leaving no room for voices like Hinako's. For her, the monster is a reminder of how oppressive and straight up exhausting it is to exist in a world where power is decided by volume, by who is louder or bigger. But there is a horror even heavier with the spawning monster. This pushes the theme of womanhood to its most brutal extreme. It is a towering figure, covered in multiple distended bellies, each one pregnant and waiting to burst. It's this factory of horrors. Its body gives birth to more monsters, essentially reducing women to nothing more than vessels for reproduction. This design depicts the reality where women were often seen as containers for a man's legacy, where a man only viewed a woman as something to plant his seed into, and the woman is just expected to endure the destructive toll of pregnancy with little regard for their individuality or suffering. And this monster in particular stands out to Hinako. The very thought of her turning into a breeding machine of endless births is far more terrifying than death itself. But there is more to this creature's form, because there isn't just one body but two, fused together, one on top of another. The upper half we already talked about, distinctly female. Oh, also I wanted to just point out her malformed face, also hollowed out to reinforce the concept of identity lost, but I don't think I need to beat that dead horse. Beneath her is the second half, which props her up. a hunched, beast-like body with a long, ridged snout and distorted facial features. This carrier reminds me of that thing from Attack on Titan. I haven't seen the anime, but I saw some YouTube shorts of that thing running around and carrying things. Update, I just went ahead and looked it up. It's called the Cart Titan. And like the spawning monster's bottom half, it's got a quadrupedal stance and that protruding face. I feel like the top half of this monster was kind of easy to understand, but it was the bottom half that I was trying to figure out what it represents. Looking further into this, I learned that its animal-like jaw recalls symbols of Japanese folklore, where creatures like the inoshishi or the wild boar represented uncontrolled appetite and relentless destruction. And so, trying to see how that fits into this monster, we have to look at the two halves to understand the whole. It's a completely messed up allegory, because on top you have the reproductive body, weighed down and dehumanized into a perpetual state of labor, but beneath is the beast, carrying her like a throne of suffering, representing the instinctual and oppressive forces that see women not as people but as resources to be consumed and cycled, products. And I think this also kind of explains why Hinako fights this particular monster with more vehemence than with other monsters.
Again? Stop trying to manipulate me. As you choose to be. I'm moving forward.
But we also have some bosses to touch on, starting with the Sakuko-like entity. I believe the bosses that she faces are just corrupted manifestations of their actual selves in real life. Like the Shrine Maiden, the Sakuko-like entity is just Sakuko. Here, she's in the form of a Shrine Maiden because that is always what she's dreamt of becoming. But some of you might be wondering what exactly was Sakuko's beef with Hinako. So, to get you up to speed in this case, Sakuko has a deep-seated fear of the dark, but also of being alone, of being left behind and forgotten. Naturally, it's not too far off for one to guess that she might become friends with somebody and completely latch onto them, maybe even turning obsessive, which was the case with Hinako. We learned through some letters while going through her section where we had to effectively kill off Hinako's friends. Although Hinako didn't really kill Sakuko, she kind of just left her with her greatest fear, alone in the dark. I guess that's the same thing as killing her. But it's through the notes where we learned that Hinako was Sakuko's first friend. But when Hinako began trying to distance herself a bit because of how weird Sakuko was being, Sakuko felt hurt. But then there was that one time when everybody was running laps in PE. Sakuko asked Hinako if she would stay behind with her because she didn't want to be alone in being dead last. When Hinako told her no, she felt betrayed. Sakuko would start to see Hinako as a traitor. Rinko, however, was totally fine staying behind with Sakuko, but not for good reasons. I break down Rinko's psychology a bit in my Silent Hill F story explained video, so I'm not going to dive too much into it here, but there might be more to Sakuko. Maybe I'm missing something, and you might be sitting there listening to me while you scroll on your phone and think, wait a minute, if that's all that happened, why is Sakuko having like this mad crash out? It's not that big of a deal. That's a good and valid question. It circles back to what I mentioned earlier about her being on the spectrum. She has autism. And one of the things about somebody with ASD is that one might hyperfocus and obsess over something, often turning mounds into mountains. You see, what might be small and irrelevant to a neurotypical, an individual whose brain functions quote-unquote normally, and I say normally very loosely because there's nothing wrong with anybody being neurodivergent. Their brains just operate differently, and that's okay. Diversification is a good thing. But what is considered not a big deal for some, for neurodivergents like Sakuko, it's world-ending. And they can't help but blow up and have complete meltdowns over things that they really hook onto. In this case, Sakuko didn't like some of the stuff Hinako did, or she didn't like how Hinako was or wasn't interacting with her, hence her festering animosity towards Hinako. But none of that compares to Rinko, who seethes at Hinako. Rinko's monster form is styled after a head priest, but instead of carrying the dignity of ritual, she is straight dripping with venom. Rinko is a narcissist, and like I said, I'm not going to dive too much into her psychology here, but know that she enjoys seeing her friends suffer because it makes her feel better about herself. her being needed by Sakuko elevated her. Note her appearance in the journal, by the way. Her aura in that picture is authoritative, and there is a reason she's dressed as the head priest. Rinko didn't care about staying behind to be last in PE with Sakuko. She wasn't being altruistic, she just liked the feeling of being needed. Seeing her friends as pets, something to be superior to and have control over, because she had so little control over the things that she actually cared about. Because Rinko was always consumed by jealousy. She envied Hinako. Hinako's resilience, her beauty, the way that she was different from everybody, cast aside but was still happy. Crazy, right? Only a narcissist would be pissed that somebody else could be happier than they are, that they weren't miserable like them. But her biggest envy was Hinako's relationship with Shu. The three of them have this unspoken love triangle. Shu and Hinako have been besties since childhood, and they've played together all the time. They even had a long-running game where just the two of them played called Space Wars, and essentially they had this esoteric connection, this bond that nobody else could organically touch or be a part of. This enraged Rinko because she always had a crush on Shu, but Shu was always enamored with Hinako. Now, the two never had a romantic relationship, I think, but the potential might have been there. I'm sure at some point, Shu fell in love with his best friend, straight simping, even to the point where I think he hung himself when her father married her off to Kotoyuki. From Hinako's perspective, I don't know if she loved him back though. I think she could've, might've, but honestly, Hinako was dealing with a lot and simply probably didn't have the space or time for love. That and Shu never explicitly stated his intentions or professed his love for her.
Your precious partner as well. Where is he? Where is Shu? Hey, is Shu really that special? He still just treats you as his pal to play Space Wars with, right? Oh, he doesn't even see you as a woman. He's just some guy you grew up with. His death won't matter one bit. You're wrong. He's my friend. He's special. My one and only partner. I won't let you kill him!
As a consequence, Hinako would assume that Shu just wasn't interested or that they were nothing more than just bros. Oh shoot, I forgot we were talking about Rinko. See what I did there? Rinko has an Anusa staff, usually a tool of purification, but it becomes a weapon in her hands, twisted into an extension of her rage. She bitterly lashes out to punish Hinako. She hates Hinako, detests her to the nines despite being civil and relatively pleasant to her face. But behind that mask is her true and wrathful face. Her loathing of Hinako is obsessive. Rinko's life became defined by Hinako, by what she could not have and by what she felt Hinako stood for. It is this very wrath that consumed Rinko, inside and even erupting into everything out and around her. That's why her monster form and the environment in which we fight her is enveloped in fires, flames, and magma. Out of all the distorted versions of Hinako's friends, Rinko's hatred is the most visceral, because it was already alive long before she even turned into a monster. But her parents were the monsters she grew up with, and in Hinako's eyes they had always been monsters. Her father was the first male figure she would be introduced to when she came into this world, and naturally, he was going to be Hinako's first impression of men. And he was a belligerent drunk, prone to easily being emotionally triggered, and he would let anger get the best of him. He was abusive both mentally and physically to his wife and to his daughters. He would bellow to assert his dominance and show that he was the man of the house. Speaking of house, he would throw things around, including knives, leaving scars all around the floors and walls. At one point, he smacked his wife simply because she didn't make miso soup the way he liked.
Idiot! How many times do I have to tell you?
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Did you even taste this? It has no flavor. You're making me drink mud. You can't even do something simple like this. What kind of a worthless woman can't make miso soup?
Stop it! You do this all the time! Cut it out!
Shut up! Don't you dare talk to your father that way! Stay out of this!
You tolerate this, Mom! Why don't you stand up for yourself? And you, Dad, if you don't like her soup, make your own! You're good at cooking, aren't you?
Hinako, stop! Please don't talk back to your father. I made a mistake. You just focus on getting to school.
You didn't do anything wrong! Dad's the one who's in the wrong here!
Hinako! Do not talk like that about your father! Get to school, now!
Not to mention he was extremely exploitative. When he got into crushing debt due to being fooled out of all of his family's money, he sold Hinako off in order to pay it all back, to pay back everything that he owed.
Enough already!
What?
Hinako, your father, he...
Stop sugarcoating it! I know, okay? It's because of your debt, isn't it?
What? You little...
You were tricked by some fool! He took all your money and it's your fault! Mom's had to cut expenses. People were laughing at Junko because she had to wear old clothes! That money was for our family! It was to bring us just a little bit of happiness! So cut the crap and apologize! To me, to Junko, to Mother! Apologize for all the trouble you've caused us!
How dare you speak to me like that?
Please don't. Please, I beg you. Hinako, I'm sorry, but could you go to the grocery for me?
But...
I don't care what you buy, just go now!
Let me go! I've had enough of this! Who the hell does she think she's talking
Please,
to?
calm down, dear. Relax.
Women get treated no differently than animals.
Hinako was married off against her will. Product. His monster's design reflects the sickening beast he was. Huge and imposing, no ears or eyes to look or listen, just a huge mouth to slag off at women. And his right arm, a representation of his knife that he threw around, but also his weapon whenever he would beat women in his house. Hinako hated him, but she also hated her mother, who was essentially just as bad, because she allowed her father's evil to perpetuate. But wait, not only did she allow it, whenever he would strike her or her daughters, she enabled it. Her mother, believing what society told her, thought that this was the norm, that she was happy and that this was everything good and truly fulfilling in life. Her mother exemplified the other half of everything wrong with society and the situation as a whole. Instead of fighting her father back, instead of protecting her daughters and saying, "No, you're not going to touch me or my girls," she enabled him. Even worse, she encouraged him by saying it was okay, that he was right to be angry, and that she deserved to get a beat down. Her mother's monster design mirrors all of this, because even she has a knife. Where her husband has his blade on his right arm, hers is on her left. And in the boss fight, you see how they complete one another to become an absolute brutal nightmare for Hinako, who suffered this every single day for years. Their behavior during the fight also speaks to how Hinako viewed her parents, in that her father mainly takes the biggest shots. He takes up the most space in the room, and he wildly aggresses. But it is her mother who helps him take space. Her mother moves fast and presses Hinako so that she can't get too close or stay close for too long. Her mother throws knives to prevent Hinako from trying to attack her father. It's no wonder that Hinako would, according to the note that she wrote, want to turn into a giant beast and crush her parents to death with her bare hands. Well, I guess fox hands in this case, because a version of her would become the Shiromuku, the fog monster, tall, imposing, and almost alien. The Shiromuku is the version of Hinako that got married and mutilated herself at the behest of her new groom in order to conform to society. By the way, Shiromuku is a Japanese traditional kimono, but we see that her arms have become fox arms. Hinako cut off her own arm when she married Kotoyuki, the fox mask. She was branded with his family emblem, literally had it seared into her back as chunks of her flesh singed off, and her face was cut to wear a fox mask. I think she'd fit right in with Liza P. But this was to show that Hinako became the horror she feared the most. This was the last thing she wanted, but thanks to her father selling her into marriage, she was forced to become this monster. It has no face. It's been cut in half, showing only the disgust that she sees within herself. Her skin and neck marred and scarred, showing the agonizing torment she had to endure for her husband to be happy. But one thing that got me confused was Junko. Hinako's sister keeps pushing Hinako to kill it.
では
お姉ちゃん
殺せた？しっかりと。しっかりね。
しっかりって。
今日だけはお姉ちゃんとあなたの2人だけの秘密にしてあげる。でも今日を超えてまだ生き残っていることがあるのなら、お姉ちゃんが彼のためにもあなたを殺すからね。
もう少し外していた方がいいかな。
いいえ。お時間をありがとうございます。
Now, initially I thought the it was just the part of herself that is the real Hinako. Junko wants the new Hinako, the one who became the thing that she feared, to kill the old one and completely give in. But as I was writing this section of the script, somebody commented on my video giving their interpretation of what Junko meant when she said kill it, stating that Hinako might actually already be pregnant and that the it is a baby, which was mind-blowing to me, but also made sense because of the Kokeshi dolls that we see in the game. Again, I go into more detail in my story explained video. I don't want to repeat all of it again, but the skinny is Kokeshi dolls could be seen as a metaphor for infanticide, where a baby was straight up killed by their parents. Lining the Kokeshi up with what Junko said, yeah, I think it's reasonable to start theorizing that Hinako potentially might have already been preggers while we're playing the game. But Junko wanted Hinako's baby gone so that it couldn't interfere with Hinako's marriage to the Tsunekis. But then I thought, that's weird. If it was Kotsuyuki's baby, which I doubt would have happened due to tradition anyways, nobody would try to keep it a secret and Junko wouldn't be pressing her sister so much. So, who's the baby's daddy? Who got Hinako pregnant? That's right, video game theorist, you guessed it. The main man, Shu. What if Shu and Hinako, actually being attracted to one another and both knowing about it, did do the diddly at some points and ended up baking some bread in the oven? That would explain even further why Shu would choose to hang himself, because it's not just that he couldn't cope with the love of his life becoming somebody else's wife, it's because Hinako and Shu's baby isn't going to make it. And by the way, Shu's death makes Rinko hate Hinako even more. However, why does Hinako's father cry at the end?
Hinako, our beautiful girl. Come on, dear. Look at her.
This isn't your home anymore. Even if you come back alone, I won't expect to be let inside.
So, part of it, I believe, is because he feels deep guilt and shame for the situation. He knows he failed as a man, husband, and father. Perhaps he knows he was a waste of life and that he continued his mistreatment of women, of his wife and daughter, but he ended up feeling badly about it. I'm not sympathizing with him, by the way. He's still a POS. I'm just trying to understand why he cries. I think it's his humiliation and realization of what he's done to destroy his family that begins to crush him, but not in the same way that Hinako literally crushes him. Except, why did he say, even if you come back alone, you're not welcomed in the house? What did he mean by alone? Well, people in my comments educated me even more on the traditional Japanese culture of that time, saying that when a woman marries into another family, she is no longer considered part of her own family. There is no, oh hey, Kotoyuki and I are gonna come over and have lunch this Sunday, or my husband mistreated me, I wanna come home. No. Her father is essentially saying, hey, even if you show up here with your new husband, you will not be welcomed here. Even if he abuses you, hell, even if you guys get divorced, you can't come back here. And her father, knowing that this is the way things are in their society, as much as he doesn't want to see his daughter go, he needs to get her to leave. But despite their tumultuous relationship, Hinako was still his daughter. And perhaps he broke a bit inside, seeing her in her wedding dress. Again, no excuse for all the BS he puts his girls through, but that's the potential answer as to why the devil may cry. Yeah, no, he was basically a devil in Hinako's eyes. So much so that she wouldn't even want to get touched by another guy, even if it was her best friend, Shu, who playfully suggested at one point that they pinch each other to see if they were really in Silent Hill.
Do you think it could be some dream we're having? Because we just want to keep playing Space Wars together?
Well, we could pinch each other to find out.
No. I can pinch myself, thank you very much.
Sorry. Seems it's not a dream after all.
Again, Giga Chads and Chadettes in the comments help me understand that because Hinako's father would hit her, when Shu brought his hand close to her face, her CPTSD kicked in. It was her knee-jerk reflex. It was her body immediately dropping gears and going into survival mode. That is why she had that huge reaction to her best friend she'd known all her life. But there is something that I want to point out. This scene happens near the doctor's house, where when Hinako breaks in, she discovers two disturbing things. An actually dead and unmoving Kashimashi, legs open, bloodied on the bed, and then she discovers a box filled with human eyes. Now, what does this mean? Well, to one of my viewers, it was, and I quote, a metaphor for SA, where the doctor physically abused his female patients and the eyes could be him making sure that there were no eyewitnesses in order to keep the abused women silent. Again, that's just a theory, a game theory, but I thought it was intriguing and possibly right. However, another one that I read said that the mangled body, the Kashimashi, was a representation of women's servitude to men. And the doctor taking women's eyes was essentially a way of saying that women didn't need eyes because men were there to guide them. So women only need to obey. Which also makes sense when we look at the faces of all the monsters and even Hinako. Eyes covered or cut. I think even Hinako's mother in her monster form had her eyes covered by the scarlet rot. The red spider lilies, which by the way are often associated with death and afterlife, guidance and loss, but even renewal and change. I think that by seeing all of the red spider lilies throughout the game, of course mostly in dangerous situations, but knowing what they represent, neatly wraps up the game and all of its underlying themes.